Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague Jeff Smith. Our mission is to share practical advice and explore topics that will help every band director, no matter your experience level, as well as music education students who are working to join us in the coming years. Together, we will discuss many aspects of a well-rounded band program, but most importantly, we will discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs each and every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're right, you rot." Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to the Growing Band Director podcast. Jeff, I can't believe we're already on episode number 66. Super excited to have you here, and to Dr. Doug Owens from Old Dominion University. Doug is a good friend from his time in Maine, and you're going to hear a lot from him and about him. He is currently the F. Ludwig Dean Chair of Music Ed at Old Dominion University, as well as the Coordinator of Graduate Music Education. Doug, did I say that right?
Yes.
Wonderful. Awesome. So a quick story, Doug, I don't know what you have for snow down there. Do you guys have snow right now?
You know, we might get 5-6 inches a year.
Yeah.
Right now, it's about 40 degrees and sunny, and we haven't had a bit of snow all year. It's been cold for us.
So for anybody watching the YouTube video, if you watch these on YouTube, I'm wearing different glasses. I'm not trying to look cool, but literally I snow blew my other glasses. My other glasses fell out of my pocket, and then I ran them over with the snowblower, and they are now somewhere in pieces, and I will find them when I'm mowing the lawn in 6 months. So this is not a fashion statement. It's simply all I own. Jeff, you and I have similar glasses now.
Yes, we do.
So I was leaving band today, a couple hours ago, about an hour ago, and the kids were fighting. And they were fighting about a very band student sort of fight. They were fighting. One kid was saying that Sevens by Sam Hazo is better. And another kid was adamant that Slava by Leonard Bernstein is better. Jeff, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Well, my opinion is that if I'm a high school kid, I'm going to pick Sevens. But if I'm an advanced high school college kid, I'm going to pick Slava for two totally different reasons, because of the content and the compositional effort that Bernstein put into the Slava. Sevens, just a cool piece for high school kids to play.
Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, Jeff put it the best, I think. I totally agree. Slava to me has got that obviously the Bernstein background and compositional cues that are all throughout. And for me, it's classic. It's been here. It's stood the test of time. And not to say the other won't, but same perspective. If I'm in high school, yes, Sevens for sure. But long-term listenability, playability, Slava for sure.
So I don't know if anybody listening knows this, but my band was not good enough last year to play Slava. However, there is a Robert Longfield edition of Slava that's of the grade 4-ish, and it's very playable. And besides being a little bit slower, it sounds like the original piece, and it's just magnificent. So that's why my kids know it. There is a great arrangement out there. If people haven't heard it, they should definitely do it.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in there too, I mean, I think that's the bigger picture, is exposing your students to the music at whatever level. So if it's an arrangement that closely resembles, and you can expose them to it, more the better, and they're talking about it, so that's perfect.
Just the mere fact that they're talking about the comparison and arguing about it is accolades to you that they're thinking musically far broader than what some kids would think.
Of course, it was our two top clarinet players having the arguments. It's not like yeah.
You know how those clarinet players are.
Yeah, they're the best.
Yes, they are.
It's always like, all right, we're going to move to this piece. And while the band is moving to that piece, because some kids actually had to move clarinets, let's work on this. So they're just always ready to go. So anyways, let's go on to why we have Doug on the program here. Doug is an expert on music-induced hearing loss, and Doug is a musician and band director like all of us. Doug, you've presented at Midwest as well as I'm sure many other places that I'm not going to cite. But today is all about basically a message to band directors. How loud is our ensembles? What are we really dealing with our ears? What should we be looking for? How can we fix it? All the things. So I'm going to turn it over to you so we can get this conversation started.
All right. So, yeah, I'd like to share a little bit about this topic. Not only the issue of the challenge of potentially having some hearing loss, but also how do we protect ourselves? And it's not to say that everyone experiences hearing loss as a band director, as a music educator, but we work in potentially loud environments, and this information is good to know. A little bit about me. Years ago, I was teaching high school, my last high school job, and I had recently changed jobs to a band room that was a little smaller, but different situation in the school. So I was very excited to change, and I was literally in middle of a rehearsal, and my left ear just
Wow.
shut down completely. Yeah, and a little scary. And I thought, well, I just have a cold, something's going on. Go to the doctor, see what's happening. And I went to my ENT. They said, you may have experienced some hearing loss. What have you been doing? You've been working outside, maybe doing some heavy equipment without earplugs. What's going on? And I said, well, I teach high school band. And then they sent me to an audiologist. The audiologist said, did some hearing tests. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but basically said, you look like you've been in front of a rock band for a while.
Wow.
And I said, well, I've been in front of a high school band for, at that point, about 13 years. And, so it was at that point where that interest started up for me. That was about 2 weeks of a left ear that had nearly no hearing and a lot of pain just from the literal impact, the sonic impact. Thankfully, that hearing, some of it came back, and the pain is long gone. But what I learned in the meantime was that my room was loud. Um, this is back in the day when when you had a Radio Shack. First of all, you can go to Radio Shack and buy a little sound pressure meter and put it out during rehearsal. And every once in a while, I'd look at it, jot it down, jot down the readings, jot down the readings. They were all 90s, 94, 95 decibels, pretty loud. And, and then over time, I figured out that the the room was had a lower ceiling than where I used to teach, and it had concrete all around, concrete block. And I had two concert bands, so both of those ensembles had me pretty much against that front wall. So no absorbing materials, nothing to pull that sound in, to rein it in, and it was just loud and reflective, highly reflective. So as it turned out, I lost about 20 decibels on my left side, and then I started becoming more aware of what could be done, not just for myself, but for the students, because as we all know, we've always got those students that live in the band room. They're gonna do their rehearsals, they'll come down to practice, they'll come down to hang out, whatnot, and they may be involved in an ensemble or two, and then there are additional activities. So we wanted to be able to protect them as well. Thankfully, the administration, took my measurements and did take action. They did have an acoustician come in and treat the room. We got those noise levels down to about 88 decibels, which very helpful, with the band playing at the level they were. But there are some other factors that are involved, and I want to just share some of that with everybody. What ended up happening was I with that job, I ended up leaving that job because I just thought, well, if well, number one, I interviewed for an administrator job, uh, and I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to really do that. I got the job, but then they said, well, you're going to have to go back to school. And I thought, if I'm going to go back to school, I really want to do that for music. So went back to get my doctorate and focused on music ed, jazz pedagogy, and wrote a dissertation on noise-induced hearing loss, and did some sound pressure studies. So what this is, just basically an illustration of the ear. We all know how this works. The sound comes in, the eardrum vibrates. You've got incus, malleus, and stapes that vibrate and amplify the sound. And then you've got membrane, the basilar membrane that is a base for the hearing structures. And then, there's interior fluid that ripples and waves form along this membrane. But this big deal, that lower photo there, are these hair cells in the organ of Corti that sit on top of this membrane, and literally, thinking of basically these structures that are floating in this space. On top of that are stereocilia, these little bristle-like channels. And, we now know that neurochemicals, glutamate and gamma aminobutyric acid, come in and create an electrical signal that goes to our brain, and it becomes what we know as hearing. And then the auditory nerve, is involved in that. And this is all public information on government websites, but what happens is, over time, the stereocilia, if we're exposed to high decibel levels over time, or high decibel levels loud enough to cause damage instantaneously, even, there's a chance that those stereocilia will deteriorate and literally disintegrate. And that's problematic because they don't grow back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that hearing loss challenge comes in for so many. The the few challenges that may come of that is what I'd like to share as well. This particular definition from American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine is just saying, this may develop over a long period of time. However, more recent definitions will say that noise-induced hearing loss can happen certainly instantaneously, depending on the level of sound and the impact, and then our own hearing structures too. Because again, some people don't have, aren't impacted by this challenge as much as others. So what do we do? When I had this issue, I was sent to an audiologist. They did the hearing test and a detailed test called an audiometric threshold exam. And we all hear, at varying frequencies, but noise-induced hearing loss can only show up between 4,000 and 6,000 hertz. What ends up happening is you might get a hearing chart like this. The X's represent the left ear. And if you look at 4,000, the 4,000 on the graph there, that's about where noise-induced hearing loss starts. And you see that that dip. It's called the audiometric notch. And that notch is indicative of hearing loss. And so this person, or this illustration, is demonstrating hearing loss in both the left ear, which is, somewhat moderate to severe, and the right ear, hearing loss between 20 and 30 decibels at 4,000 hertz, slightly impaired.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is what we strive to avoid. But usually, when you go to that audiologist, they'll do those tests. They'll put the headphones on. You'll hear those slight pitches generated, and after a while, you start hearing pitches and thinking you're hearing them, and you're pressing a button saying yes, 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 I hear that, yes, and they do the math and come up with with this type of audiogram, for you.
So if when you hear those results, I guess I would say as band directors, it's sort of my assumption that most of us, if we haven't been really thoughtful of it, probably have some sort of hearing loss from our time in front of bands. Would you say that's accurate?
I would cautiously say that. I would probably more accurately say that the potential for us to be exposed is definitely high.
Sure.
Because we, for myself, we spend, just thinking back in those days, maybe rehearsal before school. I had jazz before school. I had one large ensemble first period. I was fortunate. I had small group lessons, but I had those. Second period, short break for planning, and then another large ensemble, and then more lessons. And I had one jazz ensemble during the school day. So, and then you might have pep band or marching band after school. So, for the band director, having this level of nearly constant exposure is problematic, especially when we can have one rehearsal. You'll see it in a later slide where we could actually have, excuse me, sorry, we could actually have up to a day's worth of hearing exposure in one rehearsal, in 1 hour. So let me just
and obviously the impact has to do with lots of things besides the volume, also the room that you're in. So the room that I'm in, when it was originally done, behind you is just brick. They were thoughtful. They did treat it. However, they just put those, I don't know if you remember in my room, Doug, there's those thick panels that literally
Yes.
cover the entire back wall except for the board. So, I mean, it's basically like just muffling everything. And it's made it into the deadest room possible. It's a really terrible acoustic room. However,
Mhm.
I guess if it's going to be terrible, I'd probably rather be terrible dead than terrible alive, because at least it's better for my hearing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, obviously, it impairs what you're really hearing in a rehearsal setting compared to your auditorium. Um, uh, I know that some companies will come in and try to add some reflective surfaces, maybe in the ceiling. You've seen those panels that are adjustable.
Yep.
Some companies have the panels that are triangular or other angled shapes so that they can try to balance the room. But
I just had a audiologist, not audiologist, an acoustician, I guess, come in. I'm not going to say his name or company, but he's great. And
mhm,
my room is so terrible, not only the shape of it, but everything that's been done to it. He said to alter it now almost wouldn't do anything that you want to do. We'd have to like take out what you have and then redo that. The cheap way was $75,000. So, but I mean, I'm sure that that's not everywhere, and looking at doing something to a room is not always that expensive. But if you think about it, it's a health hazard, right? That is a really big deal. So, schools want to take care of their teachers and all that. So, it was great to hear that your school would do something. I didn't really ask because, to be honest, it's like beyond anything I would think we might do. I am curious though, Jeff, you've taught for a long time. Um, and can you tell us how your band room was for sound?
My band room had those thick uh, fibrous acoustical panels in it, and then behind that was brick walls, cement brick walls with very high ceilings, and then the floor was carpeted at first, but then we found this rubberized acoustical flooring covering that would absorb some of the sound. So it was okay, but the room was built for 70 kids. So when you put 200 kids in there, it sort of overbalanced the whole situation.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember, when we'd have to do our pep rallies in the fall and in the basketball season. And as the band would march from the band room to the gym, I'd go to the nurse's office and get big, huge wads of cotton and pack my ears with cotton so that I could at least save something, because I have hearing loss. I have special hearing plugs that I wear when I'm in front of loud sounds to try to dampen it a little bit. But yeah, I've got the ring in my right ear all the time. I can hear an A all the time in my right ear.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And that brings up a really good point, Jeff, about um, even with good a room that's treated well, when you build your program, which we all strive to do, we then are in a situation where you have maybe too many people in the room, and that can be problematic, without a doubt, without a doubt.
do you
Um,
find that did you find that um especially with the changes in percussion, now that we've gone to Tendura heads and all that stuff, where we're cranking things up to high B flats and high Ds, that the hearing loss problem within percussionists has exponentially increased?
the percussionists that have participated in the studies that we've had, nearly 100% show some sort of hearing loss. The challenge is where what environment is that coming from, and we try to do surveys in terms of their own playing, but they're playing from various ensembles, various areas. Who knows? They might even have a practice room that's way too small
Mm-hmm.
for individual practice. But uh, to have a drum line and not, especially the snares, but to run a drum line without having your students, use earplugs is challenging and potentially dangerous for them. We I know our percussion instructor is very adamant about it. He's always got a pocket full of earplugs, for the drum line, and they use them. Even at my last high school, the physics teacher and I um, were always in discussion about this. And at pep rallies, he would stand at the door and pass out earplugs to everyone. Very smart. He was
Yeah.
very much in tune to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Yeah. So thinking about just some of the challenges that exist, uh, two things might happen. If we have a hearing loss, we hope it's temporary, first of all. And that's the TTS, the temporary threshold shift. Permanent is just that, permanent. But the thing that might happen when it's temporary is we might have some ringing or some buzzing or other types of sounds that are present when we've been overexposed. That's our body saying, "Yeah, that's too loud, too much," and hopefully that subsides. Um, excuse me. The I think of people that go to concerts and think, wow, that was really loud, that was really something, and my ears are still ringing. Yeah, that's problematic. And we have to just be aware of that. And then tinnitus or tinnitus, both pronunciations are valid. That's that noise, that's internally generated. Um, it's the sound that we hear internally ringing in the ears. It's different for everybody. It could be a roar, it could be a pitch. For me, it's kind of a hiss, and I've gotten used to it. I only hear it when my head hits the pillow at night. Um, but initially, it was quite loud. But interestingly, tinnitus can have other challenges, other causes, can be brought on by excess salt, can be brought on by aspirin. I was prescribed aspirin when I first had this hearing issue because of the pain, and it made it worse.
Oh,
later to find out that this is definitely an issue. If
did you
you
say excess salt?
potentially excess salt, yes, I've
Yeah.
read about
Okay.
that. Yeah,
Wow.
I know some researchers talk about high yeast content. Certain breads might trigger it. Even yeasty beers, will trigger that. In some people, but we're really concerned about that hearing. And then there's been a few research studies in the past, and this aligns with what we found too, that Ziegler, and I think this study was at a university. College music majors experience tinnitus more than students with other majors, and uh, all musicians, percussionists and vocalists, believe it or not, experiencing the most difficulty with tinnitus. And then nobody was using hearing protection, and that's been something that that we've been striving for, and it's but there are other approaches, of course, that we'll certainly get to. But just being aware that hearing loss is potential in our profession. I have a musical example, and um, I'll just play a little bit, and then I'll interject while it's going on, to just hear how these sounds might change as a result of hearing loss. So here we go. Okay, so pretty much normal hearing. You can hear the right cymbal, you can hear the bass. Wish I could hear a little more hi-hat, but that's okay. And then, if we make any kind of changes, just by using, equalizer in this app, we can kind of simulate a 12 decibel loss, which will be coming up here. And you can hear 4,000 hertz, 12 decibel loss. We start to not hear the clarity that perhaps we heard before, especially in the right cymbal.
Yep.
Bass becomes boomier. And then one other example. Someone with severe hearing loss will be affected across the range even more. And then we start to sound like an AM radio, really.
Yeah.
That old quality. And when we go back to that normal hearing that perhaps we're used to, and I've got a setting that's my own here.
Wow,
It
what a
becomes
difference.
really apparent.
What a
Yeah,
difference.
total difference. So one of the challenges too is that just in my own family, when I'm listening to music in the car or whatever, they would make comments like, "Oh wow, we can really hear those cymbals." It's because I would always turn the highs up really high. I will always crank them up because I just can't hear up there as well as I used to be able to. And that was a sign
Yep.
for me as well. So just a couple of things. We generally know what sound pressure is. Um, um, the takeaway from here is that it's on a logarithmic amplitude scale. So basically, when we increase a certain number of decibels, the sound power is doubling, and you'll see that in the chart in a second. So typical values 60 to 70 decibels, normal conversation. Loud concert, really loud concert, 110 decibels, or if you're sitting at the end of a runway, airport runway, 150 decibels, easy. So when we measure sound pressure, we usually use A weighting, which more resembles the sensitivity of the human ear. And that's important because when we do take those measurements, they need to be accurate. So we already know our concerns. We could potentially be exposed. That regular exposure may lead to permanent hearing damage, may impact your career. Couple of examples. This is a state music ed conference, and we actually um, tested the hearing of music teachers at this conference.
Wow. Interesting.
68% of the subjects, and it was a small sample, but 68% of the subjects had that audiometric notch. And there was a pretty good cross section. 24%, we generally will lose our hearing over time naturally. So 24% had hearing loss due to age. And then 4% had no hearing loss at all or slight losses. And that's what this looks like. If you look at the left column, we're really talking about the band directors, or some people did jazz only. 32 of them had noise-induced hearing loss, or had hearing loss. 11 of them in both ears, 14 of them in one ear. Some of the choir directors, same thing. Orchestra directors, general music teachers, etc. So, and it's a small sample, so we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Spread it out over instruments. There were only 4 percussionists at this that did our study. All of them had noise-induced hearing loss.
Wow.
Brass players, yep. So, it doesn't discriminate, but we can certainly avoid it. And then looking at the scales, the ones that are familiar are OSHA, and NIOSH is a governmental recommendation that's equal to the American Council for Governmental Industrial Hygienists. But anyway, NIOSH, if you look at the difference, exposure levels, NIOSH says, OSHA says 8 hours of exposure at 90 decibels, you'll be safe. NIOSH says, wait a minute, 90 decibels is too high. Let's set the standard at 8 hours at 85 decibels.
You said so what does that mean? I mean, conversation you said was 60 to 70?
Conversation is 60 to 70. So as you can imagine, many of the audiologists will say, well, we shouldn't be much above conversational, and of course, when I've gone to these audiology conferences, I say, well, wait a minute, we musicians will never, be able to exist in that environment. We have to be able to have a dynamic range that's expressive over, over the course of the music, and of course, done in appropriate settings, and acoustics. So,
Doug, in looking at this, it looks like, if most of our bands are in the 90 to 95 to 100 range, right? I mean, we try to get our bands not to play too loud, but there's times when they need to play loud. This is looking like 2 hours a day max is what they say is safe.
That's our next slide. It's or less than that, but that's a great observation. Or less than that when you look at NIOSH. But look at the difference here. NIOSH sets that scale at every 3 decibels, and OSHA says every 5 decibels. So basically, at OSHA, every 5 decibels, that sound power level is doubling in their minds. And same with NIOSH, as you go up to the scale, every 3 decibels, that sound power doubles. So that's just an explanation. But Kyle, you're absolutely right. These are a couple of other studies showing the range. Chris Chesky is probably the most prolific researcher of this in the country. He's a trumpet player. He's at North Texas. He runs North Texas Musicians Health area. He and Miriam Hennick measured his jazz or a jazz ensemble at North Texas, 98 to 100 decibels within, and then my jazz ensemble in, I guess, this is my second band when I was in college. As a grad assistant, I measured those levels 94 to 105 decibels.
So is that to say that you got your band to play softer than North Texas and louder than North Texas? or is it just
Um,
all in the same
it
range?
is, it is, but well, that's my concert band, first of all, and
Okay.
so we also have to think about the room too.
Yeah.
Can I ask a
Because
question?
oh, certainly,
Um, when they say 94 to 105 decibels, is that
yes.
sustained sound or intermittent sound levels?
That's a great question. It could be a combination of both when you're looking at the meter. And the device I was using allows you to separate out both instantaneous sound and sustained over time. And they're really looking at sustained over time as something well, they're looking at both measures, but as you'll see in a minute, when you look at over time, you look at the potential impacts, which is quite amazing. Other studies, the big thing that has changed is that they make these measurement devices called dosimeters that are portable now. And when I did these measurements, we put a microphone on the band director's shoulder close to their ear. The device is no bigger than a remote control. You put it in your pocket or on your belt, and you walk around with it all day. And it just measures the whole day.
So
And
that's called a. Can you go back to the slide? I'm sorry.
yep,
That's called a
it's called
dosimeter, DOSI. For people who aren't watching, um,
right.
so DOSI and then the word meters. Where can you buy those, and about how much are they?
Well, the thing is, you don't necessarily need to buy those, but if you wanted to, they are, really in scientific supply facilities. The one we use is about $1,500.
Okay.
So it's not something you definitely would have on your
So
own.
this
But I have a
measures sound
better,
pressure, not volume.
which could translate in terms of volume when we think about that perspective.
So there's a cheaper
Uh,
alternative if we're getting our ratings.
and it is on your cell phone, and
Okay.
I'll show you
Okay.
in 1 second. So just looking at the potential here, this is the study I did for my dissertation. We took 10 different band directors, followed them around for 2 days each. That LEQ equals sound pressure levels. We received ratings levels between 86 to 93 decibels, with varying exposure times. Anywhere from an hour and a half to four and a half hours
Hmm.
of exposure time. But when you dig in a little bit and look at it by ensemble type, you start to see some of the differences. Um, uh, Concert bands were okay to some extent, and then you also have to factor in the rooms and the amount of people in the room and the acoustic treatment of the room, all those things. So if you look at number 9 under concert band, an hour and 20 minutes of exposure, 96 decibels. That was a huge room, but they had built the band program to a large size, and they overfilled the room, and there were acoustical curtains that were there, but and a high ceiling as well. But the sound of the ensemble was just overwhelming.
So
Or
did they have the jazz band in a different room, or was it in the same room?
in that case, the jazz band was in the same room.
So I guess the question I was going to ask is why some directors their jazz band is bigger and some their concert band is bigger, and maybe that's just the size of the band.
It's the size of the band or the size of the room.
Okay.
Because look at number 1. Number 1, that room was uh, um, a little explanation that the concert band was in a recently renovated room, but in that renovation, uh, the architects had created a side room for jazz because they thought, well, what great it would be to be able to have a second room for jazz, but they basically created a box
Mhm.
Yeah.
and with the same ceiling, but they closed it in, and that's why the sound pressure
Okay.
levels are higher.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
So yeah, and you just start to get that. The other piece is um, where the director's standing. You might be standing on a podium, or maybe wandering around a little bit with concert band. But with jazz, you're you're um, you're closer to the ensemble in many cases. And if you're like I used to be, I used to stand right next to the ride cymbal. I used to stand right at the drum set, rhythm
Yeah.
section,
Mhm.
and that's the potential of that left ear. Um, yeah, and then you get to see for those of you viewing, you can see jazz band director exposures up into the 90s. Um, uh, and then here's that maximum question that was, or the potential that Jeff was asking. That maximum could have been instantaneous level that was achieved. The maximums of 111 decibels, 115 decibels, all in the hundreds. We made sure that these events were not just somebody hitting a microphone, and you
Yeah.
could tell when you see the printout of the data from this device. And then the minimums are just that minimum air pressure moving, or whatever minimum noises there are. But that maximum sound level was overwhelmingly
And
jazz.
and even though it's not sustained, you did say earlier that even if it's a sudden noise, it can damage your hearing.
Can cause damage. I mean, think about a cymbal crash, or a rim shot. Um, those instantaneous sounds that might be impactful. And then let's look at the long-term view as well. Um, you know, Look at the OSHA schedule for OSHA standard for a second. These are all the same band directors. OSHA is saying anywhere from 11% of exposure, of their full day exposure, 8-hour exposure, up to 37%. Well, NIOSH is saying, well, that first band director that had 3 hours and 53 minutes of rehearsal is already exposed 250%, or 2.5 days of exposure in 3 hours
Wow.
of teaching. Yeah,
And,
2.5 days in one day.
I have a question. So,
Yep.
because we don't teach band every day, what if a teacher is not teaching on the weekends and they're teaching Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and they have 2 days of not? Is there some sort of like I can go over on this day if I'm not on that day, or is that an issue as well?
Honestly, I would say it could be an issue. Um, what has been uh, documented time and time again is that there's not necessarily a benefit from resting,
Okay.
from silence. Your ears don't recover, like we say. Those hearing sensors um, uh, don't regenerate. Yes, we want to have some downtime. Yes, we want to have silence, and we should. But the studies so far are saying that there's no regeneration over time.
Okay.
So, and this slide is just teasing that whole thing out. If you were to teach for 8 full hours, this is where you'd be based on those standards, 600%. For an 8-hour day of teaching at those levels for one band director.
Yeah.
Yeah, 600% of a normal 8-hour dose.
Yeah.
May I ask you a
So,
question?
oh, sure, certainly.
So it's in the last 25 years, we've introduced this thing called the Long Ranger and Dr. Beat.
Oh, yes.
Have you done any hearing studies about how that affects the hearings of the students that are hearing that all the time?
I think that would be an excellent study. I have not.
Okay.
But just when you said Long Ranger, I thought, oh man, that sound, and Dr. Beat, using
Yeah.
the Long Ranger or any metronome, that sound just came back in my brain, and I thought, yeah, that impactful, almost snare drum like metronomic, and could have an impact. It could
Yeah.
have an impact.
Okay.
Uh,
So, let's keep going. I
Yeah.
wanted to start talking about what we can do about it. I think we've seen pretty clearly. So, hearing conservation strategies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
So let's talk about that. First of all, just being aware of your environment. You can look around your room, your rehearsal room, and you can see that either there's no absorptive materials, or that it's an echo chamber. Clap your hands together, and you might hear, a highly reverberant room. You might hear flutter echo in some spaces. You'll know whether the room needs treating just from that, just as a rough guess. Um, and then you can use, and you'll see here in a little bit, but you can use your cell phone to monitor your sound pressure levels. There are sound pressure apps. There's one in particular that's very accurate. It's put out for free by NIOSH, and you can record the sound, and at the end you can basically, it's a mini dosimeter. It does everything that the dosimeter did for me 20 years ago.
Okay.
And it's amazing. Just keep track of the exposure times. And I'm also going to throw in these things. Think about your rehearsal schedule, in terms of your plan in terms of, all right, so I'm going to do this loud piece here for a while, and then I'm going to back off, maybe do some sectional work, or rehearse a ballad or something that is lower dynamics. And sometimes, just adjust those dynamics and focus on areas that are appropriate for the room, because our rooms aren't performance venues. They never will be.
Yep.
Adjusting those acoustical congestions, I would say, hiring that acoustician to come in, take a look. If you can possibly do it and it can make a difference, then it could be a good thing. Not always possible is adjusting that ensemble size. Where I taught, we were able to, ensembles met over lunch, so I was able to adjust. Especially when we did chamber music, was able to switch in, switch out, and send kids to lunch at different times, so we didn't all have to be in the room at all times sometimes. And then the biggest thing is just being aware of the changes in your hearing. I always thought that that my marching band was the loudest impact, and I even wore hearing protection outside when we rehearsed. But it turned out to be jazz and concert band, and in that setting, and just not ignoring the tinnitus or any kind of threshold shift, any kind of change in your hearing.
Sure.
And then get your hearing checked. Get a baseline hearing checked so you can know where you stand, and then monitor any changes over time.
I have a question. Do you typically need to go to an ear, nose, throat doctor, and they will then refer you, or they have an audiologist there, or do you go straight to an audiologist?
You can get a referral to go straight to your audiologist.
Okay.
And many insurance policies will cover that once a year, that trip for once a year.
Okay.
And they're very comprehensive. You can. This next topic is somewhat challenging, because as musicians, we don't necessarily want to put things in our ears, earplugs in our ears, but you can buy musicians' earplugs that have some that are molded, some that are custom, and some that have removable filters.
Yep.
Excuse me. And then and they work okay. I used them for years.
About how much are those?
These with that custom, and this is years ago now. So at the time, probably 10 years ago, they were running about $110.
Are these the ones that you sent me when I asked if I were, this was like a year ago, I said, if I were looking for something, what would you suggest? Is this those, or what we're going to get to next?
Yeah, this isn't those.
Okay.
And then these are the non-custom version.
Okay.
That might offer the 20 decibel reduction in sound. You can use those as well. And then these.
I just on the ones you just previously had.
Yep.
I judge indoor marching percussion in the winter. I wear those all the time.
Yep.
I also have the molded ones, but I find when I'm playing, I can play with these and feel very comfortable, whereas the molded ones do give you that uncomfortable feeling in your ears when you're trying to play.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And the other thing that they do sometimes is, and it depends on that fit, I know a couple of audiologists that work with musicians specifically that strive for that good fit. But the other thing that happens with any earplug sometimes is that we hear that internal sound of our articulation, and and that's a challenge. That
Yeah,
occlusion effect,
it is.
and that's very challenging. I mean, it's great for conducting, but when you're practicing, it doesn't necessarily do it. Um, and then these, and I don't necessarily want to, push any particular company. There's a couple that make these that are adjustable, um, automatically adjustable, and either battery powered or rechargeable. And this is what I use now, and uh, they're not custom. They come with a bunch of fittings. This is what I sent you before, Kyle.
Yep.
And they automatically reduce the sound levels, either 9 or 15 decibels. They kind of work in reverse of a hearing aid. They're very sensitive. When I was playing in the Virginia Wind Symphony, I sat right in front of the snare drum, and I put these in, and they did the trick every time. Again, still a little challenging to play trumpet with them in, but from the conducting standpoint, I use them. I use them regularly.
And those, if I remember correctly, they would run about $300.
Yeah, depending on the model, 250 to 300. Yep.
Okay.
And
Yep.
the app you were talking about, which you have right there, I just downloaded it in about 30 seconds.
That's great.
However
So
fast
you're
your Wi-Fi
averaging
is.
about 52.2 decibels.
Yes, and I mean, it's just that information that you're reading right now is so helpful. We get then a perspective of what's going on, and you can see from the readout, Jeff. You get the total runtime, you get instantaneous levels. So what's going on immediately in terms of decibels. You get the sound, the average sound pressure level, you get the maximum level, you get the peak level, so that instantaneous. TWA is time weighted average, so the average decibels over time, and then your noise dose based on the amount of time that you have spent listening. And that little play button is what you do to start it. And I use these in rehearsals now, and it literally is just like the dosimeter of 20 years ago that I've done a few studies with.
So
So
great.
for no cost at all, you can download that NIOSH sound level meter. So that's really it. It's an awareness. I really do think so. You may be able to do things fairly inexpensively. I rehearse my jazz ensemble in a square when we're sight reading, oftentimes, and I will tell them straight out. I said, "Look, we're facing each other. We need to bring the level down." Of course, I'm working with college musicians, and they can do that with good technique. But um, I'm regularly informing them that the room that we're in is not the performance hall, and even our performance hall is not the ideal size. So, and the other thing is we share rooms, of course, and we have some adjustable curtains, but they get adjusted by the orchestra director who wants more of a live room. I come in, I close the curtains and make those adjustments. So, anytime you can adjust your time of exposure, that's great. I now currently reduce my time to, well, I only teach twice a week. I teach my George Jazz Ensemble twice a week, and that's about what I think I can handle these days. I play bass guitar. Also, that volume is down. Um, Trumpet is usually, if I'm in a practice room, it's usually with a mute in. If I'm in my office, I usually use a cup mute, or a practice mute,
Yeah.
just to monitor.
Well, great, Doug. Thank you so much for for spending the time with us.
Absolutely.
It's just fascinating. You know, it's stuff we don't even think about. We always think about other people. You know, as a band director, you're always thinking about the students. I mean, you mentioned like smaller groups. You're like, what? Who would ever want to see? You're always trying to get more kids, you know? Just
Right.
the whole thought of all this is really appreciated. I'm sure that your knowledge has affected many lives and will continue in the future. Um, any last parting words?
Well, thank you, Kyle. I will say that you know, a quick web search will find of noise-induced hearing loss, music-induced hearing loss, hearing protection will bring up a bunch of research articles. If you look up Chris Chesky, Kris, Chesky, Chesky, he's done a lot of studies at North Texas. Um, he's even put up sound pressure meters or in rehearsal rooms so the conductors can know, have a perspective of how loud it is while they're teaching. There's just a lot of strategies that we can experiment with. I would say that, and just being aware of what's going on, and if you have questions, certainly involving um, involving professionals to come in and get assistance. And as far as your own situations in your own schools, let your administrators know that this is an issue just as much as having properly set up a chemistry lab or
Sure.
properly set up a swimming pool or whatever. It is a potential safety issue. So, awareness over time. We'll all have sustainable hearing over time if we practice that.
Well, Doug, thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.